Today we're talking about deploying your first Kubernetes application, and this is the webinar, which would be great if you want to just get an idea of how Octopus works with Kubernetes, but also if you want to look at our latest features improvements, because we're going to share some new best practices or just things you can do with Octopus now. Next slide, please, Rob. Okay, so who we are today? We have Rob, who is our principal software engineer, and Rob works on everything for Kubernetes for the last couple of years. And we have me. I'm product manager working with Rob, and my role is to figure out what else we're going to build. Let's move to the next one. So today we're going to show you just a very simple version of how you can build a CD pipeline for Kubernetes from scratch. We'll talk about different scenarios. And yeah, if you have any questions while we're going through them, just please don't hesitate and ask them in the comments. And we'll try to have 10-15 minutes at the end to answer these questions. And maybe if you have any particular deep dives, we can go a bit deep into some of those functionality. Agenda. So we'll start with describing the scenarios. So what exactly we're going to show and how could it be relevant to someone watching us online. Then we'll talk about few Octopus concepts and show them in practice. So first of all, targets and environments, that's Octopus 101, but we'll show how we can use the new agent as a target and what the advantage of using the agent versus the classical Kubernetes target in Octopus. Then we'll talk about projects and everything related to the project, like variables, process, deployment steps, how you can use lifecycles there, how you can configure triggers. So I will show you a way to create a project from scratch and deploy with Octopus. And then we'll show the actual deployment in action. And then we'll talk about a few extra things, more advanced things, which we wouldn't cover, but we'll mention them. And we'll talk about where you can learn more and how you can share your feedback with us. All right, let's get to it. Rob, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Kit. Hello, good morning, everyone. So today we're going to be walking through the deployment of two applications. The first is Octo Pet Shop. So this is an in-house demo application that you'll often see us use in demonstrations. Typically, it's really common that Hello World examples that you see online are basically these stateless or static pages. We figure that's not really representative of a real system. So this sample application is made up of multiple services. As you can see here, we've got a shopping cart and a product service. It's made up of a database application and an actual web app. We'll demonstrate how Octopus's different capabilities work for something that you might actually use in the real world. So I've forked this application for this demonstration. However, it's available here at this public GitHub repository, and the links will be available at the end of this webinar. As you can see, this is basically just a really simple .NET application, but really it could be anything, could be any language, because ultimately we're using containers here. I've added a simple GitHub deployment pipeline using GitHub Actions just to keep things really simple. I won't go into the details of the build pipeline for this demo, but it's just basically a really simple Docker build and push a set of steps that goes to a Docker Hub set of repository registries. So really simple application, basically using containers. We'll also be deploying Grafana using the publicly available Helm charts. And this is a really common tool that's used for monitoring. And both of these applications, we are going to want to deploy to both a development environment and to production, ideally in an automated fashion. Okay, so let's take a look at the project itself. So here we're in Octopus itself. Sorry, one moment. So yeah, so let's talk first about targets and environments. So what is it? What is a target? A target is basically the machine or service that you're typically deploying your deployment services to. So since Octopus supports heterogeneous systems, your targets could be a VM, it could be an air-gap machine, it could be a cloud PaaS resource, or in our case, we're going to be deploying to Kubernetes. This is represented in Octopus via a Kubernetes API target. And more recently, we've added support for Kubernetes agents that run directly in the cluster. Let's jump into the project, into Octopus itself, and have a look at how we configure one of those. So let's go back. So for those of you familiar with Octopus, this might actually look a little bit different to you today. I've actually taken this opportunity to include some changes, which will be rolling out really soon, that uplift the navigational structure. Yeah, it makes things a lot easier to find and navigate around. Hat tip to the front-end team. So let's have a look at the infrastructure area. So we'll talk first about environments. Most of us aren't really deploying to a single application, right? A single location and calling it a day, right? A standard CD pipeline probably includes a dev environment that developers experiment with. Perhaps there's a couple of QA environments that allow evaluation of a release. And then finally, you'll have a production system. All of these concepts represent environments. And this is the additional complexity on top of the targets where we start getting a hint of the value that Octopus provides to our pipelines. YAML sprawl and Kubernetes projects is a real thing, and modeling them in the right way really resolves a lot of the cognitive overload and risks that are otherwise present. So you can see here we've got a development environment and a production environment, and I've already configured one cluster for dev. So you notice when I talked about these environments, I talked about them in the context of phases of a pipeline. This is actually what we call a life cycle. So here we've got a default life cycle set up. A life cycle allows you to model those phases of your release process in a way that considers the relationship between those environments and how they make it up. They control promotion of your environments and some pretty amazing things like automatic release progression. I'm going to go off script a little. I'm going to add a new life cycle here for the sake of our demo. And we're going to create a new life cycle that will have automatic release progression between dev and production. So what we're going to do is phase environment to that first phase. And we're going to deploy it automatically to development. And we'll add another phase for production. This will also automatically deploy production. So these are, this is for those of you who really have a completely automated process through your whole CD pipeline. But that auto progression is not necessarily required. As we can see here, we've still got the default lifecycle, which will give you a chance to progress through it. Okay, so we've discussed what our environments look like. Let's have a bit of a talk about the targets themselves. So we'll go and have a look at our actual environments. I go to production, I go to development, we'll look at one of our targets we've got at the moment. So this is a Kubernetes target that we've configured using a new agent. I'm going to create a new target though for production. So what we'll do is we're going to add a new deployment target. We're going to add a new Kubernetes agent. Let's call it prod cluster. And this one I'm going to add to production. We'll give it a role, and this role is what will, this tag is what will define how it gets used in different projects. With a Kubernetes agent, you can define the storage driver that's used. I've already got that set up. So let's actually run this. So from this, we've Octopus has generated a Helm upgrade script that'll install this agent into your cluster. So I'm using Lens, which is an awesome tool for accessing and managing your infrastructure. What I'm going to do is run it directly in here. And what running this Helm upgrade chart will do is effectively download the images that are used for the agent, and then it itself will connect back to my Octopus instance. So this makes it really easy to basically get up and started, and I don't need to worry about passing credentials around, etc. It will reach back in. We'll give that a minute to run.
So because we don't see Rob's screen, what's happening behind the scenes, it's just you copy this command and you literally just paste it in your terminal window, hit enter, and wait. And that's it. Assuming you have Helm installed.
What we'll see is it will be connecting. So you can see here now it's changed performing a health check. So that instance in the cluster itself we'll be communicating back to our actual Octopus. So you can see that the target's been created and we're ready to go. So it'll run a health check just to make sure that everything's connected fine and the credentials, the access works. And then we're basically good to go and deploy that to that target. So let's now talk about target projects, sorry. Projects represent the entity that you actually want to deploy, right? It could be the entire application, it could be a single microservice, or it could be a database upgrade process. The project is where the core deployment process that you want to occur is configured. If you're coming from an Argo CD background, I guess you could really loosely map an application to a project, but projects are actually a lot more powerful. So they encompass all the processes, all the configuration required for your application across all environments. Rather than treating each environmental representation of your application as like a unique identity, Octopus recognizes that what you really want to do is think about your application and everything that it needs to be released as a single thing and not as isolated representations. Core to projects is the process. So this represents the workflow of steps within a single application deployment. It could contain a simple YAML deployment, but it could also be notifications, smoke tests, database upgrades, or any number of custom scripts. Each of these can be configured based on variables that relate to that environment and allows you to create these rich workflows that suit your needs, but covers the entirety of that deployment. Let's have a look at what we've got configured here in our scenario. So we'll go back to the project. And we'll start with our simple Grafana application. So this one's really basic. I've got my deployment process here, and I've started with a manual intervention step. This allows us to pause the deployment before the actual execution occurs so that the right, in this case, team has the chance to review the changes before progressing. So this will effectively require approval to continue. We've then got a Grafana step. I've previously configured access to the publicly available Grafana Helm chart, Helm feed, and I can add that package to my deployment process really easily with some autocomplete. I'm going to be deploying that to the monitoring namespace. And what we can also do, because this is a Helm deployment, is provide some additional arguments that will be passed to the Helm invocation. So again, unlike Argo, for example, which uses Helm purely as a templating engine, what we're actually doing is really running Helm under the hood. So you'll get all the goodness that comes with Helm. I'm also providing some override values for some of the values files, in the chart. In this case, I'm just overriding the service type and setting load balancer. I've also added then as a third step, a really simple script step. So this is, if we have a look at how that works, I could run a, let's see, Kubernetes. We've got Kubernetes script, a kube control script. What this does is sets all the context up required in the script, so that way I can go and directly run kube control commands and have direct access to all the cluster that I need. In this case, it's really simple. I'm just printing out the port that it's deployed to, the service it's deployed to. Let's do that. Let's create a release.
Just a comment on why there is a third step. So you can totally not have it, and a lot of people just have one step when they deploy with Octopus. But this is just a demonstration that you can actually add something you want, like a smoke test. You can introduce some other modifications if you want, and that will just totally work. So also you can surface information like Rob is doing right now.
So we're running our deployment. You can see it's acquiring that Helm chart. We're going to then deploy to our cluster. We'll see this kick off in a minute. This is the joy of running demos, right? You get to spend a bunch of time waiting for things to happen. Awesome. That was nice and quick. So you can see this is the output that you would have got had you invoked that directly. And now let's run that script step, and I've got a link here to the actual Grafana app, and awesome, this is running in my dev cluster. Awesome. Now what you'll see if you go back to the deployments page now is I've deployed to development, and our production is good to run. Very quickly to demonstrate that manual intervention, what we'll see is here. It's asking me to confirm. And so you notice we didn't get that in the development environment. It's because we scoped that step to production. So that was nice. That's a nice and easy one. Let's look at the application that we're really interested in, which is Octo Pet Shop. For this application, we're going to be using Customize. Now, Customize is a really nice way to template your Kubernetes files to make it simple to test your application locally using a bunch of Kubernetes config. If we have a look at that in our repo itself, we can see our base. So in Customize, you have what's called a base configuration. And this contains basically all the standard YAML configuration you'd see that you can run locally. What you then can do with Customize is provide what's called an overlay file. And this allows you to configure basically slightly different configurations that are used for different environments. What we recommend in Octopus is to define a single Octopus overlay where you define all of the values that you want Octopus to inject in those YAML files. That allows us to run the base one locally without worrying at all about those deployment concerns about different environments. But we've now got a single configuration required for Octopus. So there's no need to configure all your environments in the repository itself. Use the power of templating to control that and reduce that YAML sprawl. So let's have a look back at our application. So in this case, because I'm using Customize, I can reference those resources directly. So this is a repository. I'm pointing at that one we were just looking at. And again, in this case, I've configured some credentials to Git because I'm going to need to access it to pull down the files. And I'm just referencing that token. I'm going to be deploying from the master branch. So I put that on here. And here's where we start configuring the Customize options. So in this case, remember we're using the Octopus overlay. And what I've added here is some options to our substitute variables and files configuration. What this tells us is that as Octopus is deploying the project, it'll look in those YAML files for anything that has the Octopus templating syntax. So that's this sort of thing you can see here. And we'll replace it with the variables that are defined within Octopus itself. So let's go back to the slides. So we've talked a bit about environments and a little bit about projects, but it's the intersection of those concepts that really leverages Octopus's power. So variables can be scoped to a number of contexts involved in the deployment. Most often it's your environment. In our case, though, we want to leverage the control of variables to control both infrastructure concerns, so the replica sets. We're going to want to have 2 replicas in dev, let's say, and a half dozen in production. And we want that to differ between environments. We're also going to differ the ports that are used that are exposed by the service. And then we also want to configure the application settings. So this is things like the title bar that we'll see in the application and a bunch of text. So let's go back to our project and have a look at the actual variables we've configured. So here you can see on our Octo Pet Shop, we've gone to project variables, and we can see a bunch of these properties that are defined with their values and then scoping. So the power of Octostash and this templating engine is the variables themselves can contain references to other variables. So you can use some really complex conventions to define those variables that are used for the different environments. Let's change the number real quick as we go to development, just for the sake of it. 5. Actually, one thing I missed when we were talking about the process, I'll go back and add an additional step, and I'll go through that just to actually demonstrate how adding that step is really simple. So we're going to add so we've got a customized deployment step. We're going to add another step which will run our script. So let's call this a health ping. Because we're going to be running this deployment through that fast lane lifecycle, we want to do a really simple health ping before we progress to the next environment. So we've added our tag. So this represents that tag that's used by the target. We're going to run a container on a worker. So we want to have a whole bunch of tools available to us when we do the run. I'm going to have an inline script. And here's one I prepared earlier. Let's That's it over here. Now, details of this aren't particularly important. We're basically going to get the IP address that's exposed by that load balancer. We're going to use the web port that we've defined in our variables, and we're going to basically ping it and make sure we get it to 100. That's pretty much all we need for this one. Let's save that. Awesome. So let's deploy it and see how it all works. Actually, one last thing. I'm going to change this to actually use that new lifecycle. Create a release. So you can see here, again, we're going through that same process. It's acquiring the images, etc. We've retrieved the files used for that are defined in our customize repo. Let's quickly go to Kubernetes object status. So this is really cool. This is really powerful in Octopus. Now, when you're doing a deployment that's going to Kubernetes, we'll basically show you those resources as they're being provisioned. I forget just how many replicas I ended up adding, but you can see they're slowly coming online, and you get that feedback about what's happening in your application, which is really powerful to see and understand, and helps debugging when there's that problem during deployment. This tends to go really fast for Octopus Shop. Kit's always asking me to slow things down so we can demo the object status a bit more, but a couple of things are so efficient. Awesome. So let's go back and look at our task summary. Oh, I've broken the ping. Got a task log. Done. Bear with me. Technical difficulties.
This is basically the helping in action.
Yeah, this is the helping in action, right? So it's stopped the deployment because I figured it wrong. Version number. So each version, each release gets a distinct version number. At the moment, this project is configured to tie its version number to the image itself. So when I've created a new release, I've just incremented that manually, just so we can actually create that release and make it go through. That object set should be a bit quicker this time, since there's nothing really new to create. Quick. Come on, everything. There we go. So you can see now that's done, that's pinged. And so if we look at the logs, we can see it's just a successful status code. We go to the URL. We can see here now. And you can see I've got these values that we looked at when we were in the variable section. That's been injected into the application itself. And that's really powerful. Because I've set up the automatic release progression in the lifecycle, that helping is completed and our production itself is going out. So again, this will be going to that new target we've just configured. We'll be seeing object status run again. And
just give me a second, Rob. So Sebastian in the chat asked, do we have any step-by-step tutorial on how to create deployment for Octopus Shop? So basically, this is kind of a tutorial, but we have another doc, which I will share right now. It's not about Octopus Shop, but it's like step-by-step guide for Kubernetes in Octopus. I'll share the link in the comment.
Yeah.
And if you get access to repo, you'll see everything for the agent, for the Octopus Shop. So it's actually quite trivial, just adding the reference to the customer's file. Okay, sorry, back to you, Rob.
It's okay. So while that's running, let's talk about the next step. Back to our slides. Environment. So triggers. So we want to automate things even more. So triggers is a concept that allows you to define behaviors that take place in your project automatically. So they provide a subset of events and actions that can be added to your project. For example, creating release when a package is pushed. So let's configure some for the project we've set up today. We'll go back to our project. So we'll create a really simple one for our Grafana project. We'll go to triggers, add a new trigger. We're going to add an external feed trigger. So what this will allow us to do is deploy on Helm, new Helm chart. So what this will do is this will allow us to create a new release whenever there's a new chart pushed to Grafana Helm repo. So Octopus will watch for any new charts that get pushed, any new Grafana charts that get pushed. And as soon as a new one comes through, it'll automatically create release and depending on your automation, potentially deploy that. So that makes it really easy to keep your projects up to date with the latest versions of all those tooling. Obviously, I can imagine that's not going to suddenly trigger while we're watching Grafana. So let's set one up for our Octo Pet Shop. So in this case, again, we'll go back to triggers. I'm going to use an external feed. New application. So here, what we're going to do is we're going to watch for changes to the Docker image that we've got in our application. It gets pushed to Docker Hub. So we'll watch just one of them. It doesn't matter which one. And what that will do is, again, Octopus will watch the Helm repository, and whenever a new version of that container gets pushed, which is later than the current one for this environment, it'll for this current project, it'll create a new release and in this case deploy it. So obviously, if you're pushing, earlier releases or hot fixes, etc., that won't necessarily push it straight out and configure it that way. So there's a little bit of control there that we give you to define how and when that trigger fires off. But it's really this is really powerful, right? Because it allows your application to just update when your CI process updates. There's no need to push changes, and it allows Octopus to effectively pull the updates into your application directory directly. So the trigger is configured. Let's make it fire.
So let's pause here for a second and just talk a lot about three concepts we just demoed in a nutshell. So for the first project for Grafana, Rob just showed us how you can do deployments manually in Octopus, and you totally can do that. So you can go through the dashboard and press deploy button, right? Or you can configure your CI pipeline and just trigger the same button but via API. So your CI can say, okay, I'm ready to deploy to test, now go and deploy to test. So this is awesome if you want this full control and maybe you're just starting and it's a very simple app. Then the next step, what Rob showed us when we deployed Octopus Shop is you can do it automatically and you can configure lifecycle, which is basically the sequence of environments in which your release should progress. You can configure that lifecycle to deploy automatically as soon as the previous environment deployment was successful. So basically I deploy to test successfully, then I'm deploying to staging, then I'm deploying to production. And that's exactly where you want to add this extra step and do some simple check like a smoke test. So you have a green tick and you know that you can safely progress further. But now you still need to create release. So you still need to tell Octopus, hey, there is this new version of the app which I want to deploy. Finally, with the triggers, you can skip on that step. You can say, okay, Octopus, look at my Helm charts or look at my container images. And as soon as I have a new version there, and I can have a new version of multiple of them, as you saw in the trigger configuration, you can reference few containers or few Helm charts. If one of these have a new version, create release for me and combine with lifecycle, start deployment, and you can configure it as far as just deploy to production straight away, right? So this the more you can configure that in the way you want, you can get either in full automation mode, you can get fully manual, or you can stay somewhere in between. That's basically your choice. Back to you, Rob.
Awesome. Thanks, Kit. Good to have someone do a bit of a summary after digging through that. So we're going to trigger a deployment. So we're going to make a really simple minor change to our application, and hopefully our trigger will kick in and create that deployment. So what we'll do is let's update our Let's do something. Let's stick an emoji here somewhere. Smiley emoji. So this, we're going to make this commit. This will trigger our GitHub Actions CI process that will create an image. It's going to push that image to Docker Hub, and then Octopus will kick in and watch and notice that change and create a new release. Let's commit our changes. While that's running, so this is going to take a minute or two to actually run the deployment itself, the build itself, sorry. I'm not going to make you sit there and watch the GitHub action run. So instead, while that's running, I'm going to talk about one last sort of great feature that we've kind of got here, and that's configuration of code as code. So it's becoming increasingly common and clear that the benefits of being able to declaratively define not just your infrastructure, but the pipelines themselves. Octopus provides that ability to store your project resources in a Git repository. So that includes project settings, variables, the process, and shortly also runbooks, which I won't dive into in this demo. So not only can they all be source controlled, but then that branch semantics that are provided by Git can introduce a whole new way to the way you, a whole new process to how you manage and update your projects. Allows you to sort of experiment and deploy different branches and really manage the control that way. So let's do that for our application. So we jump back into our project, and what I'm going to do is version control our project. Actually use the credentials. What I'm going to do is I'm actually going to store the configuration for this deployment process in that same repo itself. And so that's kind of nice, right? I can keep all my infrastructure details, the application itself, and also the deployment process within a single repo. So I'll include the same repository. I'll use that GitHub credential I configured earlier. And this is basically asking us where do we want to store our configuration. I'll store it in a subdirectory, but you can sort of define that wherever you want. And this is useful if you've got multiple Octopus projects sharing a single Git repo. Sticking webinar. In this case, we define the branch. I think this one uses master. And that's basically it. So what we'll do is we'll hit configure. Really useful message. And this is basically going to take all our project settings, serialize it into OCL, which is similar to HCL, similar to what you'll see with Terraform syntax, and put that into our project itself. So that's done. And you can see already some of these links have got this little branch icon. And that means the details in these areas are now version controlled. So you can see here, I've got a branch selector. Let's have a look quickly at what we can actually see in the repository, just to kind of see what it's just pushed. So you can see there, that's just pushed that commit that I added. We have a look at what it's got in here. So this is a declarative representation of that entire that project. So we've got deployment processes, we've got settings, we've got variables. Secrets, obviously, we don't store in the repository. We keep them in Octopus. But what this allows you to do is configure these directly from Git if you'd like, and leverage the power of Git for your process. Let's have a look at if that trigger fired off. Awesome. So you can see while I've been talking that the change that I created earlier has created a new release, and because I've got that auto deployment pipeline set up, it's just gone straight out to development. It's run my health check. You can imagine this could be a complex smoke test of some sort. We've got our smileys there, awesome. And let's have a look and see if it's gone out to production as well. I can see the previous one went out, so my infrastructure is working. Let's just make sure that. Yeah, awesome. That's good to see that. Again, you can kind of see that gives me that feedback that it's actually creating those containers It's going to be spinning new ones up. It's always nice to actually see some visual feedback when you're actually running a process like this, right? Gives you some confidence that it's actually doing something useful, not spinning its wheels. Awesome. So deployment has succeeded. You can see it's leave the resource checks. It's going to be running that help ping. And last thing, it's going to be hitting that endpoint. And so that port, remember we configured, was configured differently in between production and development. So we've exposed that on a different port. So if we now go to that, production, awesome. So we've got our smileys there, but we've got a bunch of different configuration that's been injected based on the different environments. And so that's it. So we've configured our project, we've got the trigger set up, and we've also now stored it directly in Git. So it's all completely source controlled. And Kit, I'll pass back to you.
Okay, so we talked about a lot of things, but most of them are still very like basic one-on-one in Octopus. So now I want to step a little bit back and talk about other things which we didn't mention, but you might want to explore them, and they're actually quite useful as well. So first of all, which is not on the screen, let's talk about customize. Because customize actually was added not just because we wanted to get another thing for templates, but we wanted actually to show you to give a tool to combine power of YAML templates with power of Octopus. Rob just showed us a basic example where you have one app configured on the base level, and then you have overlay adding Octopus variables. That's good because you can have your pure YAML, which you can deploy without Octopus, on your local laptop as a developer or somewhere else. And if you want to add complexity, like change something for environment, yes, you can do that with Octopus variables. However, you can go actually way, way, way deeper with that. So you can think about, what if I have one base layer for all my apps? I want to have one template for multiple microservices, but then I want to have a separate layer just to modify bits and pieces in each of this app group. Let's say I have an internal API and I have some like backend to front end, and I want to have a little bit of a different configuration there. So you can add the first overlay, still without Octopus variables. And then you have second overlay, adding Octopus variables on top of that. So that's how you can go. Or you can even add the second overlay, adding some in-code changes for your environments. Let's say you want not just have simple changes in number of replica sets or database string. Let's say you want to introduce a whole new object. Let's say in your production you would like to have ingress, right? You can do this. You can have an extra overlay per environment and then still add the Octopus variables on top of this. So the issue here, if you wouldn't use Octopus, would be, customize, it's one to many, right? So you have one base, then you have, let's say, first level of overlays, and then your second level would be like a tree. So overlay on the second level could reference only one overlay on the first level, and etc. Right? With Octopus, because you can actually have, that's a good question about sensitive variables. I will answer that in a second. So with Octopus, because you can actually change the reference right in the Octopus overlay as a variable, you can actually have this final overlay pointing at the right, at the previous overlay folder as you go for environment. You can change this. So basically, your Octopus overlay in test will point to an overlay in test. Your Octopus overlay in production will point to production. So if you want to learn a bit more how you can do this multi-layer overlays, use this thing. This is here. We describe a few scenarios, and you can literally build all sorts of templates with customized Octopus. You can have like one template for all your apps. Okay, now what about sensitive variables, Rob? How can we manage via version control? I think the simple answer is you can't. But let's talk about why. Why is that? And what's the alternatives? How you can do it, let's say, with the vaults.
Or is that okay? Yes. So with Octopus, you define the sensitive variables. Currently, you would define them within Octopus itself, and we'll inject them in at execution time. But obviously with Kubernetes, there's a bunch of other options that you could easily integrate into your system. So it could be using, sealed secrets, or you could be using external secret operators. And as long as you've got those defined in your YAML, you can inject the sort of the parts of that make sense for your application.
Yeah, so our idea is that we really don't want to store sensitive variables in Git, even if they're hashed, even if it's like sealed secret. So we have, I think, we had actually a webinar last year talking about why even sealed secrets introduce a lot of potential issues. So we're just avoiding this. And yeah, you can have a choice. You can either manage the version of the secret variables in Octopus, or you can just use any of the vaults, like HashiCorp Vault or any other vault, and you can inject it there. This is like just, in our opinion, better way, safer way to do that. Okay, so going into other advanced features, which I just briefly mentioned, I won't dive into them. So tenants. Tenants is another abstraction on top of environments. So if environment can give you progression from like test, dev, staging, and production, sometimes you want to have multiple clusters or multiple regions in one environment. Let's say in production, I could have regions. I could deploy production in North America, production in Europe, and production in Oceania. You can actually just add 3 targets, and then all of them would deploy at once. But maybe I want a bit more control. Maybe I want to change some variables depending on the region. Let's say in one region I'll have more replicas, in another region I have less. Maybe I have different databases connections. Maybe I have different credentials. Maybe I just want to deploy to one region first and to others a bit later. So that's why we have tenants. So you can say in production environment, I have now 3 tenants. Each tenant represents a region, and one target, one cluster, is scoped, connected, associated to this tenant. So that's how you can just model this with yet another layer, and everything which we talked before, including variables, is applied here. So you can have very granular control over what goes in each of the tenants and environments. Runbooks. So after deployment, sometimes you need to run a maintenance task. Let's say you want to get some logs, you want to scale that up and down, you want to reboot the app, or whatever else you might want to do. So we have a whole section Octopus which allows you to run a lot of maintenance tasks on your app while it's already deployed and running in the cluster. So just look at the docs, play with the instance, you'll see examples of how you can use that. Terraform. So everything which Rob showed, you can configure with Octopus UI. You can configure with Octopus OCL as code, but you can actually use Terraform. And if you want to deploy or create template projects at scale, you can do it in the fully automated manner. Just a couple of months ago, one of our customers created about 1,000 Kubernetes projects just within a few days with Terraform, and this is actually quite easy. Step templates. So sometimes if you're an admin of Octopus and you want your teams, your application teams to create projects themselves, you can just have a step, let's say customize, and save it as a template and let people change, let's say just a few things. Let's say you want them to change a Git repo, or you want to change a few other parameters. So you can enable your teams without going through complicated and deep configurations. Just choose the template which you showed, which you saved in Octopus, add it to the process, change a few things, and they will have fully functioning pipeline. So finally, variable sets. So Rob showed us how you can have a variable in a project, and you can scope it to environments and tenants. However, you can actually have a variable set, which would be a layer above projects. So what it means, you can create a set of variables which would be used by multiple projects, and you can manage them from one central point, right? So sometimes it's good, especially if you have, as we said before, a template for all your apps, and then you want to have variable sets for different mutations of this app. This is for API, this is for BFF, this is for my front-end apps, etc. So take a look, or you can go with Octopus quite far, adding these features, and yeah, your configuration could be very granular. Next slide. Cool. While we were talking through the webinar, we showed you the repositories where we store configuration. We show you Octopus instance, and we save the configuration for configurations code in the same repo. So the links were in the chat, now they're on the screen, and we'll add them to the webinar in YouTube. So you can totally go there, explore it all yourself, and just look at how it was done. Next slide. If you want to learn more, we have documentation. There are a lot of different instructions for each step, for Helm, for Customize, for YAML, for variables, for whatever you need. Just take a look, and yeah, if you didn't find something there, let us know. Next slide. Finally, our roadmap. So we're constantly developing new things for Kubernetes in Octopus. Just right now, we're working on live object status. So Rob showed you object status, which you can see and observe the changes in deployment. We want to make it live, so you can go there and see it happening real time, even after deployment is done. We have more advanced ideas about general monitoring Kubernetes resources and just debugging. We're going to add workers to Kubernetes, so you can actually deploy to other targets, not just Kubernetes, using Kubernetes as like a execution for a pipeline. We want to add more granular permissions, so you can control what the agent can do in your cluster, and you can scope it to a project or to project environment. And we're going to add more triggers for Kubernetes, so you would be able to create, release, and start deployment not just on container image changes or Helm changes, but you would be able to start the release creation on changes in your Git repository. And actually, there are many more. So my ask is, if you're interested in any of these features, or you want maybe some more features, you can go into this link, look at what we're doing or going to do, and give us thumbs up, thumbs down, and add a comment. So you can literally say, yep, I do want this, please ship it earlier, or no, this is not really relevant for us, I don't care. Both are incredibly valuable, and honestly, like, we look at this and read it every day. And you can also give us a hint about
very interested.
Yeah.
So I was just going to say, we're very interested in what customers have to say, right? We want to build what customers want, not what we think you want.
Yeah, and you can even give us a new idea. So there is a button in the roadmap. You can say, hey, you didn't mention this, but that would be just incredibly helpful for us. And finally, yeah, you can just try Octopus. You can go into octopus.com/start and have a 30-day free instance of Octopus where you can do everything which Rob just showed and more, and just explore the tool yourself.